So the title of my talk is API Security Through External Attack Surface Management. This presentation was based on an article that I wrote for a United States cybersecurity magazine back in 2022. I was working for an external attack surface management company, and just through using their product and having a background in offensive security, I was just trying to think of ways to get the word out how it could be leveraged in people's security. So a little bit about my background. I'm an offensive security professional and instructor. So I've been in cybersecurity for January made 21 years. I've been on the offensive security side for over a decade. I've worked as a internal pen tester, started my career as a consultant when I moved over to the offensive security side. I'm a host of the Phillip Wiley show, previously hosted the Hacker Factory podcast, and I'm a former adjunct instructor at Dallas College. Really, teaching was one of the things that really got me into speaking as a way not only to educate people, but just kind of a way to build my own personal brand. But it's been a great experience. Met a lot of awesome people through speaking at conferences. I'm also the concept creator and co-author of the Pen Tester Blueprint, starting a career as an ethical hacker, and is also featured in the Tribe of Hackers Red Team, which actually got me the opportunity to write the book, The Pen Tester Blueprint. So I like to share this slide at conferences because this was one I like to share. I usually do this only in career talks, but I've gotten where I share this more frequently. So that way, it helps motivate people trying to get into it, because I was a former meathead pro wrestler, was a power lifter, never thought I'd use my mind to make a living. So I ended up going to CAD school, became a CAD drafter, found out about sysadmin work, found out I had a knack for the computer side of things, worked as a sysadmin for a little over 6 years. And then in January 2004, moved into cybersecurity, information security, as they were calling it back then. And about a year and a half later, moved into application security. And this is where I found out about pen testing and really got interested in pen testing through that. And so this is like one of the areas I've stayed in most of my career, although I was in the next longest was in application security, where I spent about 7 years. But it's been one of the areas that's most important, and it's important to me and interesting. So that's kind of why I've kind of stuck with it. And so the agenda, we're going to define attack surface management, prioritizing the external attack surface, risky exposed services and protocols, risky API exposures, discovering attack surface API pen testing and tools, and addressing the gaps with external attack surface management. So kind of just to define attack surface management, kind of according to NIST, it's the set of points on a boundary of a system element, or an environment where an attacker can try to enter, cause an effect on, extract data from that system element or environment. So we need to really understand that before we get into it. So attack surface, this is any of your areas that could be prone to attack or breach. And one of the important things when doing any kind of pen test or anything, you need to define what that attack surface is to help better scope the targets in scope for the pen test. So attack surface management, importance. So from here on, you'll see ASM for attack surface management, or EASM for external attack surface management, just to abbreviate. So it assesses security from a threat actor perspective. It is hard to assess and secure what you don't know about. Pen testing once or twice a year is not enough. Reoccurring vulnerability scans are not enough. Threat actors are constantly scanning the internet looking for vulnerabilities to exploit. One prime example is leveraging tools like Shodan to find exposed APIs, to find exposed webcams, to even find the HMI interfaces to ICS environments where they could actually control different ICS devices, including manufacturing equipment, even water treatment and electrical generation equipment. And so CISA, reducing the significant risk of known exploited vulnerability. So if you have it checked out, the CISA KEV list. I highly recommend checking that out. That's the known exploited vulnerabilities. So this quote I like from CISA is also many vulnerabilities classified as critical are highly complex and have never been seen exploited in the wild. In fact, only 4% of the total numbers of CVEs have been publicly exploited, but threat actors are extremely fast to exploit their vulnerability of choice. Of those 4% known CVEs, 42% used on a 0-day disclosure, and 50% within 2 days, and 75% within 28 days. Meanwhile, the CVSS scores of some of these are medium, even low severity. So threat actors are chaining together lower severity vulnerabilities to gain access, because you kind of see some of how the 0-day exposures, 42%, are being used on day 0, 50% on 2 days, and 75 within 28%. But one of the things to really focus on here is that the lower level criticality vulnerabilities can be chained together and exploited. So we can't overlook those. We need to keep those in mind when we're remediating, when we're performing pen tests against that attack surface. So attack surface management addresses both internal and external facing systems. While both are important, our focus today is going to be an external attack surface management. What you're going to learn here could be used internally. A lot of it could be used internally, but we're focusing on the external because this is the most readily available globally. Someone can attack you from the internet, a lot of times from external attackers. This could be even Wi-Fi, external attackers can attack your environment. But since we're discussing APIs, we're going to focus on the external attack surface. So the elements of attack surface management. So vulnerability scanning, vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, red teaming, AKA adversary emulation, purple teaming, bug bounties, and application security and testing integrated into the software development lifecycle. So vulnerability scanning, we're going through and doing any kind of discovery, trying to find any assets available. And through our discovery for APIs, we're looking for any kind of hosts, and then we're going to look for the APIs. But you really need to do that discovery, find those systems, perform like your vulnerability scanning, and find the vulnerable systems as well as any API vulnerabilities. And then we'll get into more later on how to address the APIs. So some of the traditional gaps is compliance-based pen testing. So PCI was one of the things that really drove, or PCI DSS, that stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, was one of the big drivers for pen testing becoming recognized. Before that, a lot of companies weren't doing pen testing before some type of regulatory compliance came about. And so what happened there is once compliance pen testing came about, all the focus was on PCI. Companies were taking that budget, putting it towards testing anything in scope for PCI. So this kind of narrowed the scope, because pen tests originally were more full scope, including social engineering, physical pen testing, testing everything possible. And then the scopes had to be narrow to be able to take advantage of that budget to be able to get everything covered for PCI. A lot of things got missed out. Some of the things that's happened over the years too is just like some of the phishing campaigns have become in-house emails where you click on it, there's no payload. So some of these things are really scaled. The focus is so narrow and a lot of things are missed out. Time and resource limitations. Pen tests are referred to as a time box test, kind of a snapshot of that cybersecurity posture at that time. So this is really limited. So a lot of times if you're hiring a external company to do a pen test for you, a lot of times, unless it's really a large pen test, it's limited to like a week or 2 weeks. So sometimes that's not enough to test. If it's internal employees testing, then sometimes you've got a little more time, because consulting can be very expensive, consulting hours. So companies are limited on budget, so they have to work within that budget. So sometimes testing is not as thorough as it needs to be. Incomplete and inaccurate asset inventories. I was working for a company and we outsourced, we took care of our internal pen test and red teaming, but we outsourced our web app pen testing. When it came time into the end of the year to use some budget, we had a bunch of web applications to pen test, but we did not know all the URLs. So it took this exercise of going through discovering all the URLs, making sure we had all those. And I mentioned, Tanya had mentioned having an inventory of those applications and APIs. This is one of the things often overlooked. So you need to make sure that you have a good inventory of those. So when you're doing your test, you can thoroughly test everything. So prioritizing external attack surface. So internet exposed and highly accessible to threat actors, internet exposed services and protocols are possible risks. Although we're focusing on API here, but one thing to keep in mind, take away from this today, there are other risky protocols to be exposed. Just like remote desktop protocol, you don't want that exposed to the internet. If you have it exposed or you need it to be externally accessible, use a VPN, put some kind of controls around it to protect it from a threat actor brute forcing your RDP. And penetration testing once or twice a year is not enough. You really need to be doing something continuous, and we'll cover ways to address that. So recurring vulnerability scans are not enough. And so most companies doing a combination of both, but you really need to be frequently scanning, frequently pen testing. So risky exposed services and protocols. So remote desktop, as we kind of mentioned, Microsoft Windows protocols, SMB protocols on Unix and Linux-based systems, clear text protocols like HTTP or FTP or Telnet. We make sure those are not exposed. And these are some of the things, like I said, we're covering APIs today, but something worth mentioning during this presentation to keep in mind that you're also watching these things whenever you're testing, or make sure that, the teams that take care of the infrastructure or more of these type of protocols, you make sure that they're kind of seeing that these are being monitored and continually scanned and tested. So risky API exposures. So what is a web API? So API stands for application programming interface. A web API is an application programming interface for the web. So this is for your websites. It's web facing, so it's connected to the web. There's also other APIs that are used for your operating systems, but we're focusing on web APIs. A browser API can extend the functionality of a web browser. A server API can extend the functionality of a web server. So one of the things that APIs has helped do, because back when I was getting started, I got started in information technology as a sysadmin back in 1997, and back then we had middleware servers. So yeah, like Microsoft BizWorks server, it would connect to other servers, and then when APIs came around, it was a way to connect different systems through different browsers, different devices, handheld devices, mobile devices, and this served a big problem. It was able to resolve this problem that before writing different interfaces for different platforms or using middleware servers, this kind of solved it. And it's a great way of doing these things. But one of the things that's happened is sometimes these get overlooked as far as security goes. Sometimes people think because APIs are hard to discover that it's going to be hard for threat actors to discover and exploit those vulnerabilities. So risky API exposures. So naturally, you're going to think of insecure APIs. So APIs that aren't secure, unintentionally exposed APIs. So sometimes there may be APIs in your environment. This for internal use only. So you want to make sure those aren't being exposed. And you want to make sure all your APIs are being properly secured. That way they can't be exploited by threat actors. So addressing external attack surface management gaps. So EASM, external attack surface management discovery, reconnaissance, including open source intelligence. So using things like Amass, there's some commercial tools you can use as well for managing external attack surface. So make sure that you're doing a good discovery and keeping an accurate inventory of your APIs. And then reconnaissance, including OSINT and open source intelligence. Sometimes you may find things through open source intelligence that you may not find that you have record of. And one of the examples that I like to share from my pen testing career was one time I was doing a pen test for a company. It was a full scope pen test. We started out with a black box approach and then went internal to the company. But one of the things when I was doing my reconnaissance, I was looking for any IP addresses. Since this was kind of a black box threat actor approach, I had to do reconnaissance to find all the IPs, all the applications, anything exposed. And I found all the network blocks, did subdomain enumeration, found everything that should have been in scope, that if probably would have been reported if we'd been doing a white box test, and a full scope being provided to us, a thorough scope. And so one of the things I discovered during my OSINT activities, I was using Shodan, and I found that they had an FTP server in Indonesia exposed to the internet. This was a chemical company, and through the login banner on an FTP server, I was able to find this asset that otherwise wasn't in any of the IP blocks. It was at this data center or a manufacturing facility somewhere outside of their normal IP range. And so I was able to find that. So through reconnaissance, I was able to find that. So through reconnaissance, you can find other things too. You can find APIs that may be in use that you don't realize. And so making sure not only you're doing your discovery, you're also throwing in some OSINT along the way. So during your discovery, you're going to collect all known IP addresses and domain names. And then also you're going to do your reconnaissance against those. So you do all that, you do the discovery, you collect the known IPs, and then you're doing your reconnaissance using different types of tools, including like a mass. So API address discovery. So looking for the different autonomous system numbers, the different regional registrars like ARIN and RIPE, subdomain enumeration using Subfinder, OWASP, AMAS, and then open source intelligence, Shodan or Crunchbase. So Crunchbase is a good one because this is mergers and acquisitions data. So this is a good one here if you're ever looking to acquire a company, is look through Crunchbase, and you may be able to find some systems and information about that company that otherwise you may have not found out. And a lot of companies are starting to leverage this during mergers and acquisitions. So this was referenced from Jason Haddock's Bug Hunters methodology. So if you haven't checked this out, he teaches a workshop on this, as well as this video here on the Bug Hunters methodology. He shows how to go through and thoroughly do reconnaissance against an organization, including OSINT, to collect all the information before you start your testing. And so you're during this phase, you're doing scanning. So you're scanning IP addresses and domains, including subdomains, Nmap for live hosts, and then Nmap port and service scans to identify web resources. So once you identify these web resources, then you're going to be finding the systems where more likely you're going to find APIs residing. And so API endpoint discovery. So API enumeration tools, Kite Runner for RESTful API discovery, and FOOF for wordless-based API discovery. So I got this information when I was doing my research for this article from Katie Paxton Fear, aka Insider PhD, on her automated testing toolbox for APIs. So that's one of the things too with the APIs is get your automation set up, follow what Katie's doing. You can set up a VPS, a virtual private server, with tools on here to constantly be testing. This is one of the things that bug bounty hunters leverage, and some that are highly successful. They'll put in domain names and different targets that they're testing within their external system so they can constantly scan and test. And although you're constantly testing, there are times that maybe security gets changed. There's an update. Security is loose, less restrictive, or it opened up a new hole. So you want to be constantly testing. So using some kind of automation is a good way to do that. And so using API endpoint discovery, this is something you can use in your enumeration. And so API vulnerability testing. So API vulnerability testing tools, Authorize is a burp suite extension for detecting IDOR, Logger++, a multi-threaded logging extension for burp suite, SQL Map for SQL injection testing tools. And you can actually do SQL injection through APIs. If you check out Juice Shop, which is a vulnerable web app that you can set up for learning pen testing, they also have a lot of APIs to test. So that's a good vulnerable system to set up to test for APIs, to learn API pen testing. NoSQL Map for NoSQL testing. And then JSON Web Token testing tool. And then Burp Suite. So this is an interception proxy and vulnerabilities testing tool. And OWASP Zap is another tool that you can use for your vulnerability scanning, which the vulnerability scanning is included for free. You have to have the professional version of Burp Suite to be able to do the vulnerability testing. And so this is from Katie Paxton Fear's video on API automated testing. And so API vulnerability testing tools, OWASP Zap. So Open API is an add-on, GraphQL add-on, and SOAP add-on. And there's also, you can import, there's import files containing URLs add-on. So you can import files containing APIs. And so this was found at Zap Proxy's website, where you can find more information on how to test for APIs. So API vulnerability testing. So OWASP API Security Top 10 and API Security Project, as well as having so much great web app security content. OWASP also has API testing related content. So the top 10 and then API Security Project. And one of the things too, when you're doing your API testing, you want to make sure you're testing for vulnerabilities outside of the top 10. The OWASP top 10 are the most common that they're seeing at the time, but there could be other vulnerabilities out there that maybe were on a previous top 10, but not on the current top 10. So you want to test outside of that top 10 as well. So addressing gaps with external attack surface management. So continuous discovery. So make sure you're continuously discovering and rescanning your environment, keeping that asset inventory up to date. And then good thing about the asset inventory, going back to doing their penetration testing, you've got a more accurate inventory that you can give to the pen testers to thoroughly test that environment. Continuous testing. So ways you can do this is vulnerability scanning, pen testing, external attack surface management platforms. There's a lot of offerings out there now for continuous pen testing. You can also address this through bug bounty. So continuous testing through bug bounty programs, doing a responsible exposure program where you're kind of managing a bug bounty program, but these are ways to constantly be testing. So using vulnerability scanning, pen testing, bug bounties, and the external attack surface management platforms are a good way to constantly monitor that attack surface. So use automation to improve scalability and resource limitations. It also improves consistency. So make sure you're using automation to do this. There's some automation that you can use within some of the testing tools. Some people are using Selenium within OWASP Zap to automate testing. And then look, as the industry grows, people are coming out with more and more automation for testing out there. And Trickist is another good platform for doing automation of your testing. It was created by someone that was a pen tester and doing bug bounty, and they shared the way they do their automation with the community. So you're able to use that. And so remediation, make sure it's timely and complete. And going back to that quote from CISA, the thing about the lower level vulnerabilities being chained together to be exploited. One of the examples I like to share, when I was doing a pen test during my consulting years, I ran across this company. We're testing. We had a 90-day retest. It was a external application, or it's actually external pen test. And during that pen test, we found criticals, highs, mediums, lows. And we came back 90 days later. I was doing my initial vulnerability scans. All of the criticals, highs, and mediums were remediated, but there was a low criticality vulnerability that was still there. But between that time, someone figured out an exploit for it. So now it was no longer a low. It was a critical and exploitable. If they hadn't done the retest, then it could have been exploited, because the company was doing pen tests once a year. There would have been a year between testing that was laying open and vulnerable. So this goes back to why your remediation needs to be timely and complete, as well as your continuous testing. Make sure to be continuously testing, even when you're not pen testing. If you're not doing continuous pen testing, then vulnerability scans between can help some. And so references to the resources here. So this article I wrote for US Cybersecurity Magazine is available there, and it's got references from this presentation. It also includes Jason Haddock's Bug Hunter's methodology, Katie's API discovery reference, and for further information, check out, if you haven't, Corey Ball's book on hacking APIs, or AppySec University, which is an awesome resource, a free resource. So something you really want to take advantage of. And also, if you haven't checked out Portswigger's web application security academy, check that out, because it's a really good way to learn web app pen testing. They include things around APIs. They've even started moving into some AI related stuff as well. And so that concludes my presentation. There are my links for social media, or you can use my QR code, which has all my different social media platforms, as well as my podcast, my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel, I have a free playlist of my pen test lectures from Dallas College when I taught there. So it's available there, as well as a link to the article that I just mentioned. So you can check that out. So thanks, everyone.